I mean, what do you want me to say? The last year's been rough, and the start of a new one, while nice in a wipe the slate clean sort of way, doesn't actually signify the end of any of our current problems. Things are still hard, and they're probably going to be that way for a while. And that's not supposed to be a downer. I guess it's like a call to action. You can't just wait for things to get better. You have to try and get involved. You have to make things better. Which is why I sat inside and played video games all year. A lot of stuff came out this year, so much that even with the surplus of free time, I couldn't reasonably expect to get to everything. So before we get to the honorable mentions, I want to take a moment for the games that couldn't make it here today. I think Starfetchers is probably one of the most overlooked games of the year. The first episode is free on Steam right now, and it's not perfect, but the comprehensiveness of the visual and writing style is really impressive. It might not be for some people, but if it is for you, I promise you, you will know within seconds of starting the game. The magic of Doom 2016 was that it was simultaneously the most video game and the least video game. There was none of that extra shit that other games put in there to pad the runtime. The whole thing was the good part. The story was there without getting in the way, and it had a sense of humor that was subtle about the game's own lack of subtlety. Doom Eternal feels like it took that foundation and then just added back in all the stuff it didn't need. I mean, just the openings of each game show this off really well. Doom 2016 has you shooting demons within seconds of starting the game up, and one of the first things you do is push a cutscene out of the way so you can go kill more demons. Doom Eternal starts with a traditional cutscene, and then suddenly you're shooting a bunch of demons, and then it goes into another cutscene. When Eternal is at its best, it's just as, if not more fun than 2016. But you only get little bursts of the game at its best in between awkward platforming segments and these jarring cutscenes where it fades to black to show you the door that you just opened. The mechanics are good, but the levels just don't take advantage of that, and the game just isn't as good at striking that balance between fun, open murder toolbox and forcing you to play the way they want you to play, the way 2016 was. I originally wrote this whole thing about how Cyberpunk is classic Eurojank and maybe we should be nicer to it, but Umurangi Generation is good if you like Cyberpunk. The fact that the entire game is about taking photos means they get to force you to interrogate these detailed levels they've created. And the whole time you're piecing together the narrative of what this world is without anyone ever having to turn to the player and say, let me tell you something. This city, it's kind of fucked up. Super Hot Mind Control Delete is more super hot good shit packaged in a very solid roguelike. Valorant tickled the part of my brain that still likes playing Counter-Strike for some reason. And I know Trials of Mana is literally a remake of an old game, but it feels like a JRPG that stepped out of the PS2 generation. Everything about it is so goofy. Okay, take this ancient, all-powerful spirit of pure light. In your mind, what does that sound like?
Heyo, looking for Lumina? That'd be me. Nice to meet ya. A pleasure.
Like, it's a perfect game. The The Last of Us 1 is one of my favorite games ever made. And The Last of Us 2 isn't. Alright, that's the video, everybody. Thanks for watching. Come back next year for more. I think the first game had this really effective balance between beauty and horrible nightmare shit that made both ends of the spectrum feel more meaningful. The Last of Us 2's brave narrative decision was to make all of the characters either so unlikable that you don't care, or so boring and pointless to the story that you also don't care. Joel feels more like a plot device than a character in this one, which is a problem that potentially annoying Chosen One child character Ellie managed to overcome in the first game by having a dynamic and interesting personality, something they've completely gotten rid of for this game, because apparently it was really important for us to learn that violence is bad through a character that is now essentially a cardboard cutout that cycles through Duke Nukem quotes.
I'm gonna rip off your head and faint at the sight of blood.
If your story is bloated and overlong and inconsistent and seems content to ride on the idea that a downer tone or a bait-and-switch narrative is somehow novel enough to justify itself, even just in video games, I don't care how beautiful your environments look or how seamless the item pickup animations are. The storytelling doesn't work. Killing people's still pretty fun though, I do like that part. Little Big Planet was one of the first games I got for the PS3. I always loved the personality of the game, but the fact that it only let you make 2D platformers was a little limiting considering the platforming felt like doo-doo. But then Little Big Planet 2 came out with the Controlinator, a device that let people make their own control schemes, and that's where shit got wild. People were slapping together shooters, machinima, better platformers. And Dreams is essentially the logical conclusion of that. There's so many tools in this thing. Some people just make levels, some people specialize in making specific art assets for other people to use in their levels, which are usually models of Shrek and recreations of music from Shrek. But other people are making really cool, creative stuff with this. The sheer magnitude of what Dreams will let you do is really only matched by your creativity. But fuck that, that's not why I'm here. You want to have a good time with this game? You're going to want to hop on that search bar, type in the first word you can think of. Any word. The dark, seedy underbelly of asset flip horror games and shitpost videos is the chaotic, beating heart that powers Dreams. It's this unfiltered Wild West energy that's so cool to see in a game that's this well put together.
Oh my god!
I've never been that into roguelikes, and the only time I've played a Supergiant game was a few minutes of Transistors, so I really wasn't looking forward to Hades. I only checked the game out because people said it was cool. And hey, they were right. The progression system and framing provided by the story is such a simple and effective way to make restarting a compelling part of the gameplay that honestly it kind of makes every other roguelike look like an idiot for not thinking of it sooner. On top of that, you got tight, satisfying, arcadey gameplay and a UI that massages the graphic design part of my brain. Oh my god, those animations are so good. There's just such a high level of polish and care that obviously went into every aspect of this game, and seeing the attitude of the fans and the people that made it, it's just a really easy game to feel good about. If I have one complaint about the game, it's that everybody's too hot. Like, it's genuinely upsetting. Why do they have ASMR mics? Why is that necessary? It's Tony Hawk. Do I need to explain to you why Tony Hawk is good at this point? Obviously, this franchise has had a rough, how many years has it been since? 16 years? But the sting of the newer games being a trash fire was always kind of lessened by the fact that the older ones held up so well. I could always hop into Underground 2, do some pop shove-its, grind a little bit, watch Bam Margera make sex jokes and bully a guy in a wheelchair. Okay, not Everything about them holds up. But as far as games that are just inherently satisfying to play, those early Tony Hawks are right up there with, like, Tetris. Like anybody who even glanced in Tony Hawk HD's general direction, I was skeptical about this thing, but hey, they nailed it. The combos are long, the restarts are fast, they made all the right choices when it came to updating these games, and honestly, that's all it took for it to be one of my favorites of the year. It'd probably be higher if it had maps from 3, but I'm sure they'll get to that eventually. I already talked about Go Home in my PT video. It's the worst. I love it. Obviously, there are games higher on this list, but I'm not sure most of them will have the lasting effect on me that Go Home probably will. It takes a certain type of person to vibe with this game, but if you just submit yourself to the chaos and let this game wash over you, it's really something special. There's something you should know about me. I like to shoot things. In video games. When I was like 11, I played Command & Conquer Renegade for the first time, and it's not very good. But then when I was like 14, I played Fear and Half-Life 2, and that shit blew my mind. To this day, I still have a hard time differentiating between good games and bad ones that just have bullet time or let me blow things up with shotguns. I mentioned before that Doom really didn't scratch my shooter itch, and the reason I was okay with that is we're kind of in a great time for shooters right now. I don't know if Doom 2016 inspired people or it's just a coincidence, but we've seen some really great shit in the past few years. Even this year alone, you had Unfortunate Spacemen, which is a Trouble in Terrorist Town style deception game about astronauts that is maybe the most unfortunately timed release of the year. Ghost Runner, which is like if somebody looked at all the best platforming segments in Titanfall 2 and said, hey, let's make a game that's just that. And the first episode of Ultra Kill, which I talked about the demo for last year. It's a first-person character action game that makes you look at every other shooter and go, is my game running in slow motion? What's going on here? But my actual favorite shooter of the year has to be Proteus. It's a love letter to Doom. Not just old shooters, not just old sprite-based shooters, it's specifically Doom. And the visuals, while not novel on paper, are in execution chunky and satisfying and fulfill this deep, primal, probably actually genuinely concerning need that I have to see video game people explode. And the maps are, unlike some other shooters that came out this year, mostly really well designed and just the right length. And those are just the ones in the campaign, because the other aspect of Doom that Proteus is trying to recreate is the level sharing community. Even if there weren't enough levels in the base game, which trust me there are, there's effectively an endless supply of cool shit that people are making for this thing. No Shrek yet though, so maybe give it a few months. If Unfortunate Spacemen was the worst timed release of the year, I'm gonna say the best timed release of the year was probably Animal Crossing New Horizons. I play video games for the power fantasy of going outside and talking to people. I was never that into Animal Crossing. I liked City Folk well enough, and I tried a few times to get into New Leaf, but I think I was just in the right headspace for it this time around. Building furniture, visiting islands, New Horizons isn't doing anything super original, but it was just fun to make a routine out of picking away at it every day for a while. And sure, I haven't played the game in a few months, but I'm sure my town is just the way I left. I've got a problem. I like fighting games, but my brain is small. Despite the fact that Melty Blood was my introduction to the genre, and I love them stylistically, most anime fighters are just too fast for me. I want to like slower games like Street Fighter, but aesthetically, it just does nothing for me. If only somebody could make a fighting game for me. Granblue Fantasy Versus is goofy anime bullshit at a pace and flow that is way more appealing to me than most of the ArcSys catalog. A pretty good amount of the cast is fun to play too. Jita's a great Ryu, Cagliostro and Fairy have awesome set play, and Ladiva does that. It's so cool it almost made me care about the Granblue mobile game. Almost. It's still definitely complex enough to be fun, and it still makes my brain feel very small on regular occasion. It just feels so good to do anything in this game, even get hit, which I do that one a lot. I've played Phantasy Star Online 2 off and on since about 2012, but I've never really stuck with it until it officially came out in the US this year, and I stuck with it pretty hard this time. It's easy to play solo, the basic combat loop is really satisfying, and the music is, I think this is Sega's Final Fantasy XIV, not just in that it's an MMO that robbed me of most of my free time this year, but in that it's owned by people with access to some of the best composers in video games, and it seems like they've just kind of been off in their own little corner pumping out ridiculous shit for the past 8 years. Here's the thing. I can't, in good faith, recommend PSO2 to most people. The customization and progression aspects are just pointlessly obtuse and outdated. Half the missions kinda suck, and visually it's kind of a nightmare, but punch enemy number big, and the rhythm-based combat is just such a satisfying hook to keep you progressing through this thing. It's just such a laid-back, who-cares atmosphere for this type of game. Sometimes it feels like the VR chat Second Life equivalent of an MMORPG. Which, carries over to the user base. Come on down to Phantasy Star Online 2. In it, you can meet people like Swag Monkey, Pancake JPEG, Very Old Short Robot, whatever the fuck this is, Kingdom Hearts. Damn. Simp, and more. Ugh. So, for this one, we have to go back a bit. Like, specifically 1 decade. In 2010, I was a little goblin. I had neither the emotional maturity to process most of what I was experiencing at the time, nor the mental maturity to know that just pulling a comb through your bangs does not equal good hair. In this growth period, I was at my most susceptible to media that would go on to inform my taste as an adult. The discovery of anime and bullet time murder were still a little ways off, but what I did discover was a Wii game called Sakura Wars So Long My Love. It was a visual novel with strategy RPG elements about a group of Broadway performers who moonlight as demon-fighting robot pilots in an alternate history 1920s New York City. If you're somebody who likes the social link aspect of Persona, imagine a game that is mostly that. It had this Saturday morning cartoon vibe and some of the goofiest, most earnest storytelling I've seen in anything to this day. I'm talking about a chapter about mortality and overcoming your limits where not only are we doing the caged bird metaphor, but the characters are also putting on a production of Hamlet in which the chapter's focus character changes the famous line to this.
To be or not to be, that is not the question. To be or not to be is no problem at all.
You know, real subtle type shit. The combat sections are a slog, and they only get worse and more frequent as the game goes on, but it's my favorite game ever made. There's not even a doubt in my mind about that. The only thing that's ever come close is Higurashi. And maybe someday I'll talk about what the series as a whole means to me, but it all started with this game. I don't know that I would have the same appreciation for a lot of the media that I love today if the 14-year-old me hadn't checked this game out on a whim because they thought that robots were cool and the samurai cowgirl was pretty. I still think both of those things. But in the following decade of graduating high school, college, getting a job, moving out of my parents' house, I didn't get many chances to revisit my love for Sakura Wars. It's a hard sell, and most people haven't heard of it, probably because Nippon Ichi thought it was a good idea to localize the 5th, and at that point last, game in a series 5 years after its initial release, and put it out on the PS2 and the Wii, two consoles that had zero audience for that kind of game in 2010, and also spend like a shitload of money getting basically the entire Persona 4 cast to dub it. So it never really seemed like there was going to be another Sakura Wars, let alone one that came over to the US. Then in the past couple of years, you had a fan translation that taught me that I love Sakura Wars 1 almost as much as I love 5, and Sega Japan held a poll to see what games people wanted to see make a return. Sakura Wars won that poll by quite a bit. Not long after that, they announced that not only were they working on a new game, but it was coming out west. Called Shin Sakura Wars in Japan and just Sakura Wars over here, it came out in April, a time when, due to circumstances very few of us could have seen coming, I lost my job and had to move back in with my parents. I don't know if I can really explain what it's like to hear the new rendition of the original theme song, with the new instrumentation and verses that then culminate in the original chorus, but if it says anything, I don't think I've been able to listen to it all the way through once without tearing up a little bit. Shin Sakura Wars is basically a soft reboot that brings it back to the location of the first game a few decades later, and vitally replaces the jank-ass strategy bits with a totally competent action game. It's not going to win any awards, but the upgrade from actively annoying to, it's pretty fun, is more than enough for me. Especially because the combat isn't why I care about this game. When they announced this thing, I was convinced that, at best, it would be a polished-up attempt at recapturing the basic premise of the original games without any of the stylistic flair, and most importantly, just nowhere near as dumb. What I hadn't considered is that they would make the leap from Persona, but it's just social links, to Yakuza Oops All Side stories. A very important thing about my taste that Sakura Wars 5 imparted on me is that stupid things are good. Unironically, this isn't an ironic thing. I just prefer stories that are so earnest that they border on farcical to people outside the target audience, to something that plays it safe so it can be taken seriously. And being taken seriously is not exactly on the list of priorities for a game about the demon-fighting robot Olympics. It's so uncompromising in its devotion to the goofy-ass tone that I couldn't keep the smile off my face the entire time I was playing. Everybody's so immediately lovable, and the design of the game only encourages you to get to know them more. The visual upgrade was put in all the right places too. There's a ridiculous amount of mocap in this game, to the point that it feels a little weird when a cutscene isn't voiced. All the effects and added visual flair really add to the charm of a game that's basically all about charm. And robots. Shin Sakura Wars isn't perfect, even for this type of game. I think the ending's a little weak by serious standards, the progression aspects are still just sort of thrown in there, and your choices really don't affect much. But I don't really care. This feels like potentially a new beginning for a series that's meant a lot to me for a long time. Your ability to enjoy this game is probably directly inverse to how much you care about something being smart and complex. And if I've said it once, I've said it a million times. I'm not smart. And I would have loved this game regardless of when it came out. But right now feels like a really great time to experience something that's so fun and light and blatantly optimistic. Which is why The Last of Us 2 is my game of the year. I play a lot of VR games. The technology is at a point now where it feels like I'm in the game, which is crazy. It feels like the future. Last year I talked about Boneworks, a game that I think does a solid job proving that VR can work for well thought out, sprawling campaigns instead of just limited, simplistic experiences. And Boneworks gets there through a pretty unapologetic inspiration from Valve. Valve was one of the first game studios that I really cared about. Half-Life 2 was the first time I thought of games as something that had to be designed and put together instead of just a fun box I got to mess around with. Left 4 Dead was the first co-op game I cared about playing with my friends. Portal I still think is a perfect video game. Now, if Boneworks is a loose assembly of ideas taken from Valve game design philosophy, Half-Life Alyx is proof that they're still worth copying off of. I don't want to sound hyperbolic about Half-Life Alyx, but I don't know that that's actually going to be possible for me. I think it deserves all of the hype that Half-Life 2 got back in 2004. I think it deserves to influence VR games the way that Half-Life 1 and 2 influenced 20 years of shooter campaigns. I think I like it more than Half-Life 1 and 2. And obviously VR is a barrier to entry for some people, I respect that, but I really don't think Valve shot themselves in the foot by making this VR exclusive. VR is the game. There is no Half-Life Alyx without the head tracking and motion controls because the entire experience has been built from the ground up to take advantage of that. As much as I love VR, I really don't think a lot of VR games really take advantage of it. The main selling point of VR is also somehow one of its most commonly missed opportunities, and that's the sense of presence that being immersed in these environments in 3D actually gives you. It's not enough to trick you into thinking it's real life. Well, you know, not for some people. But even kind of a shitty VR game can trick enough of your senses that your lizard brain is like, oh shit, that thing's coming at me. But the inherent advantages of the headset and the motion controls can only take you so far. Consistent art direction and narrative pacing are enough to get you immersed in a game that you're just playing in 2D on a screen, but most VR games kinda just look like fake video games in a TV show. Something like Blade and Sorcery is so visually generic that it doesn't really register as real life to me when I'm playing it. At least that's what I tell people. Half-Life, though, for all its desaturated industrial environments, has an extremely unified art direction. And when you combine the strongest implementation of that art direction in the series with the natural advantages of VR, Half-Life Alyx is by far the most effective VR game at making me feel like I'm really there. I said before I've played a lot of VR games, but the level of physicality and depth that VR provides this game in particular is on another level.
Yeah, look at him!
Damn, this sucks.
What? He's having a good time! And that's only one part of the overall Half-Life Alyx experience. You've also got a story that, while engaging, funny, extremely well acted, never really gets in the way of the atmosphere. The gunplay is polished down to a mirror sheen, without all the obtuse simulation crap that seems to find its way into every other VR shooter. And the levels! I know I'm biased towards Valve games, but it's been so long since I felt that pacing that made Portal and the other Half-Life games worth raving about. Every level feels designed around something, and they're just the right length so that you're not bored by the time it's over, but you're also not disappointed that it didn't do enough with the concept. I can genuinely say the words, "The Jeff level is a watershed moment for video games," and mean it. The whole thing comes together beautifully, and it even ends perfect, which is not something I can say about any other Half-Life game. It's a game anybody with VR should play, and if you don't have it, the fact that this exists and will probably go on to influence the future of the medium, I think makes it totally worth it. So that's it. That's the year. Thanks for watching. I genuinely hope next year is better for everybody. I'm probably going to spend it playing some new games. Well, I'll be real with you. I'm probably just going to play more Blade and Sorcery.
Jesus Christ.